Hello, my name's Aubrey, and I survived a cave my sister sealed behind me, on purpose. She called it an expedition. She said it would be fun, but when I turned around, the light was gone. And so was she. That cave wasn't just rock and silence. It was years of being edited out of our family's story. It was the final proof that her smile always hid something sharper. They believed her. They always did. But what happens when the quiet one comes back from the place she wasn't meant to return from, carrying receipts? Would you have believed me? Would they? Or would I still be just her little sister, somewhere in the dark? The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the house wasn't the smell of rosemary from Mom's roast or the low hum of conversation. It was the wall. That gallery of pride and proof. Our family's attempt to frame success, quite literally. Photos of Sable, of course, everywhere. Her undergrad award ceremony, the night she received that regional science medal, and a glossy shot of her shaking hands with the mayor after the community excavation initiative. All blown up, beautifully lit, preserved under spotless glass. Then, tucked near the corner, I found one from our childhood, an elementary science fair. I remembered that day. I'd built a working volcano, and the judges loved it. In the picture, Sable stood in front of a tri-fold board, holding the ribbon we were both awarded. My face had been cropped out, cleanly, deliberately. I stared at it for too long, heart dull and throat dry. But I said nothing, just smoothed the crease on my shirt and stepped into the dining room like it hadn't happened. The table was already full, Sable at the head, naturally. She was mid-laugh, telling some joke about fieldwork boots and international customs officers. Everyone ate it up. I slid into an empty seat near the end. "Doctor," Vale, one of the donors said to her, "tell us more about this cave you'll be exploring next week." Sable didn't even glance my way. "It's an isolated system up near Flatiron Hills. Very promising. We're calling it a structural echo chamber. Some rare mineral formations, untouched layers. Exciting stuff." I waited, just long enough, then added, "I actually first surveyed the site 5 years ago. I cataloged its depth and—" She cut in without missing a beat. "Yes, Aubrey did the initial mapping. She's always been great support, especially behind the scenes." The table chuckled. I smiled politely. My jaw clenched so tightly I was worried I might crack a molar. Behind the scenes. We ate. Or they did. I moved my fork around, catching only pieces of what was said. I heard words like PR potential, international funding, and award-worthy. Sable stood to give a toast. She raised her glass, charismatic as ever, voice smooth as an NPR segment. "This expedition is a culmination of years of dedication, and it wouldn't have been possible without the perseverance of our research office and, of course, the support of this incredible institute." Polite applause. No mention of my name. One of the board members leaned toward me, kindly clueless. "You're with logistics, right?" I nodded. "Something like that." As the evening dragged on, I tried to justify it in my head. Sable was always better at public speaking. She knew how to hold a room, how to charm a crowd. I preferred the field, the dirt under my nails, the data sheets only 2 people on Earth would understand. Still, it didn't feel like oversight anymore. It felt strategic. Once dessert was cleared and people began to linger with coffee and bourbon, I slipped outside. The porch creaked under my steps. The October air had a bite, sharp and dry. I folded my arms, exhaled slow. I almost called Rowan, just to hear a voice I trusted. But he had skipped the dinner altogether. "Not a fan of social showcases," he'd said. I didn't blame him. I stood there quietly until I heard her steps. "You always get moody at these things," Sable said, stepping beside me like we were still 10 and sharing secrets under blankets. "Still sensitive after all these years?" I didn't look at her. "I guess I never got used to being cropped out." She laughed, light, dismissive. "Oh, that? It's just a bad framing job. Let it go, Aubrey." She handed me an envelope. Heavy. I took it. "Let's make next week like old times," she said. "Just the 2 of us. You and me. In the caves." I nodded, smiled like it meant nothing, but it meant everything. By the time the sun began slicing through the blinds in my guest room, I'd already been up for an hour. I didn't sleep much. Couldn't. I lay there most of the night trying to unpack what Sable's little porch speech really meant. Just the two of us, like old times. That could mean anything. And with her, it usually did. We left before 7 a.m. after a quick breakfast of burnt toast and coffee so bitter I barely swallowed it. Sable was humming as she packed up the Jeep, tossing her gear in like she'd done it 1,000 times. And she had. We'd been field partners for years. Only this time, it felt off. She had 2 packs, one for each of us. Mine was the usual: gloves, markers, water, field journal. Hers looked bulkier, heavier, like she was planning for something more than a routine survey. I asked if she needed help lifting it into the back, but she waved me off. "I've got it. You know I always overpack," she laughed. I tried calling Mom from the passenger seat just to say we were heading out, but my phone battery had dipped into the red overnight. Sable noticed. "Don't worry, I called her this morning," she said, casually changing the radio station. "Told her you said hi and all." I hadn't asked her to. I hadn't even known she had Mom's number saved again. Something about it made my shoulders tighten. The drive out to Flatiron Hills was quiet. Not awkward. Just absent. Sable was unusually upbeat, pointing out new signage along the trail road, even cracking a joke about my old beat-up hiking boots still being in service. I smiled, but didn't really laugh. My stomach had that tight feeling you get before a storm. We reached the trailhead around 8:30. The wind picked up as soon as we opened the doors. Cold and dry, with the edge of winter already creeping in through the pines. I led the way up the narrow path, my boots crunching over loose rock and old leaves. The air had that earthy scent, wet moss, minerals, history. This was my terrain. My heart should have been beating with anticipation, but I kept glancing over my shoulder instead. Sable stayed a few steps behind the entire hike, humming something I couldn't place. A soft, tuneless melody, like she was walking through a museum. Every time I stopped to point out a stratum or a fault line, she nodded, said, "Cool," and kept walking. No questions, no notes. After about an hour, we reached the cave mouth, a narrow, jagged opening in the side of a limestone shelf. I felt my chest tighten, not from exertion, but reverence. This was it. The seam. The system I'd mapped out from air readings and seismic anomalies 5 years ago. The one no one believed was worth a return trip, until Sable saw the revised mineral scans I sent in last spring. I reached out and touched the edge of the rock. It was cold, but familiar, like a handshake from someone you used to trust. "I still remember the first time I stood here," I said, more to myself than her. "There's a sediment dip here, leads to a hollow chamber. That's where the iron traces started." "We'll have plenty of time for this," Sable said, stepping ahead of me. "Let's go deeper, like old times." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I paused, unsure if I was hesitating or simply cold. Then I pulled out my phone again. No signal, not even a flicker. I turned to her. "You said you called Mom?" "Yeah," she said, adjusting her gloves. "Told her we'd be offline for a bit. She knows not to worry." I didn't remember giving her that message. Still, I nodded. Pulled on my headlamp, checked my pack. When I glanced over at hers, something caught my eye. The outer pocket was unzipped slightly. Inside I saw duct tape, a hammer, zip ties. Nothing illegal, just strange for a cave survey. "What's all that?" I asked, half smiling. "Just in case we need to secure loose rocks," she replied smoothly. "You always worry too much." And with that, she turned, ducked into the cave, and vanished into the dark. I stood at the threshold for one long breath. Then I followed. She was just a few feet ahead of me, her boots brushing loose gravel across the cave floor. The beam from her headlamp swept along the jagged rock, highlighting the seams we'd once talked about mapping, back when our voices still held warmth. The cave opened wider the deeper we went. My heart, oddly, steadied with every step. There was something calming about rock. It didn't lie. It didn't smile to your face and then steal your work behind your back. It just was. I found the seam about 20 feet in. The one I'd only dreamed might still be here. A glittering line of black mineral curled across the stone like a secret under a whisper. "This is it," I said aloud, crouching. My gloved fingers brushed against the surface. I unzipped my pouch, pulled out sample bags, and got to work. Behind me, I heard Sable shifting her weight, stepping slowly back. Not in interest, not in respect. It felt careful, intentional. "See?" she said, her voice echoing faintly. "I knew you'd find something." It wasn't praise. It was the kind of comment you offer just before walking away from a table someone else set. I kept my focus, labeled the samples, sealed them, took photos, but the energy had changed. There was tension in the air, like a storm humming under the surface. Then she said, "Hey, Aubrey, come check this tunnel out. It bends off left. Might be a second chamber." I stood, brushing dust from my knees. "We should mark here first." "No, just a quick look. You can finish this in a minute." I hesitated, then nodded. I walked toward the narrow passage she was pointing at. It looked just wide enough to squeeze through. As I stepped toward the edge, I heard her moving again behind me. Faster now. And then came the sound I would never forget. A crack, then another, and suddenly, a rush, stone and grit and sound colliding like thunder in a narrow room. I turned just in time to see the rock wall collapse behind me, blocking the entrance. I lunged toward it. "Sable!" Silence. Then her voice, muffled but still far too cheerful. "Relax, just a little fun. You'll be fine. You always overreact." I pounded the wall. Dust filled my lungs. "Are you out of your mind?" No answer. I stood frozen for what felt like minutes. Then I heard something mechanical, faint static and a pop. A voice, my voice, echoing through the chamber. "Let's see how long she lasts." It wasn't me speaking now. It was a recording, audio from earlier. Sable had been recording me, or recording herself, framing it like a challenge, like one of those influencer prank videos. The sound came from a Bluetooth speaker she'd left somewhere just out of reach. My throat tightened. I screamed her name, beat at the stone until my hands throbbed. My gloves tore. My voice cracked. She didn't come back. After the rage faded, what replaced it was quieter. Worse. I slid down the rock wall, my knees to my chest. I thought about the report I'd sent in last month, the full write-up on this cave system, including my GPS data, my theory about the untapped iron beneath the third layer. I'd sent it from my personal account. I'd been proud. I took out my phone, not expecting service, but needing to look. The email was gone. Not in drafts, not in sent. Then I checked my backups. There it was, sent 2 weeks ago, then forwarded to another address. SMV. Sable Marion Vale. She had accessed my email. Forwarded my data. Probably rebranded it under her own name. She hadn't just buried me in this cave. She'd buried me on paper first. I stared into the dark. I couldn't cry anymore. There wasn't enough moisture in my body for that. I took out my headlamp. It flickered, once, twice, then held steady. For now. I leaned back, speaking to no one. Or maybe to the cave itself. "This is mine," I whispered. "I found it. I named it. I know every vein in its body." The silence didn't respond, but I wasn't finished. There was a shift in the cave's air, barely noticeable, but real, like something had been taken out of it. Not just oxygen, but presence. Her presence. I waited a while, listening for her return, hoping maybe this was one of those pranks she'd drag out too long, only to come back laughing. But no sound came, not even the crunch of her boots, just the whisper of dripping water echoing down the stone corridor. I moved forward, careful not to waste the headlamp's light. Every step took me deeper into a system I once felt belonged to me. Now it felt hijacked, weaponized. That's when I saw it. A yellow folder, tucked into a crack in the wall where the stone had recently shifted. Probably dropped when she turned to leave, if it wasn't left there on purpose. I crouched down and opened it. The pages inside were smooth, freshly printed. A project proposal, high-res graphics, title page, preliminary discovery and mapping of Echo Layer Caverns, Boulder County, lead, Dr. Sable Marion Vale. I flipped through each page like they might bite me. On page 4, there were diagrams I'd drawn myself, the sediment bands I'd labored over, hand-marked notes on possible mineral veins, but my name wasn't anywhere. No co-author, no credit, no mention of my years of work. She hadn't just left me behind in a cave, she had written me out of the record. I sank down against the rock and held the folder in my lap. It was all coming into focus now. Why she'd been so insistent about just us. Why she'd smiled like it was an inside joke. I let my mind drift back. Not far, just a few years. A university mixer. I was wearing a dress I'd only bought because the saleswoman said it was professorial. Sable had insisted we go together. She said it would be fun, low-key, a good way to network. I remember standing near the drinks table when a woman from our alma mater walked over. She looked from Sable to me, then smiled politely. "You're the little one, right? The sister who almost became a dancer?" I had blinked. No. I work in geological surveying, caves, mineral maps." "Oh, I guess I haven't seen your name around, but I've read all of Sable's stuff. Your family must be so proud." I didn't answer. Sable took the opportunity to pivot the conversation back to herself with a charming story about a podcast interview. Now, underground, with her lies in my hands and no one else around to hear me, that moment hit harder. I pulled a piece of chalk from my side pouch. It was supposed to be for mapping, marking turns, setting orientation, but I used it to write one word on the wall beside me. Witness. Not for anyone else. For me. I traced my path backward until the rocks turned unfamiliar again. Then I turned down a tighter path I hadn't taken yet, following the faint sound of water trickling from somewhere ahead. As I walked, I whispered out loud, half to steady my mind, half to fill the silence that was beginning to press in too much. "Sediment on the left," I murmured. Layer 2 splits at shoulder height. Possible air shaft above. Orientation northeast. I kept going, one foot in front of the other. The air thinned the deeper I went. My headlamp flickered again, once, then steadied. My breath shortened. I stopped to sip water and took another look at the folder. Near the back was a note, handwritten in the margins. Board copy, no edits. This was the version she'd meant to show others. She'd planned to unveil it, stand in front of a crowd and smile while I disappeared from every page. I remembered something she said once, late at night, after a conference where I'd been overlooked. Again. "You're brilliant," she said, sipping white wine. "But I'm the one who gets people to listen." She said it like it was a compliment, like she was acknowledging some cosmic balance, my brains, her voice. But it wasn't balance. It was theft with a smile. My fingers clenched the folder tight. "They will listen now," I said out loud. Not just because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because I was still here, alive, loud, even in the dark. The farther I moved into the cave, the more I realized just how quiet real silence can be. It's not just the absence of sound, it's the absence of acknowledgement, the kind that creeps up on you when someone decides you no longer deserve to be heard. About 10 paces in from the last chalk mark I'd drawn, I noticed a plastic sleeve wedged between two stones. At first, I thought it might be debris from years ago, but the plastic was too clean, too new. I bent down, slipped it out, and saw her initials in small black Sharpie at the top corner, SMV. Inside were neatly arranged pages, printed, crisp, not damp yet. The label on the cover sheet hit me first. Press kit, final draft. I didn't want to flip through it, but my fingers moved anyway. It was all there. My site map, my original stratigraphy notes, except they weren't signed by me. The author line read, Principal Investigator, Dr. Sable Marion Vale. And under Contributing Team, blank. Even the diagrams had been altered, my pencil sketches digitally re-rendered into sterile CAD models. It was like someone had traced over my handwriting with a computer, then erased me from the original canvas. It wasn't just identity theft. It was intellectual erasure. I leaned back, folder in hand, breath shallow. That document was the version she planned to give the press, maybe even to the board. She wanted her name on every inch of this discovery, and mine nowhere. And worse, she'd probably get away with it. unless I made sure she didn't. The cave wasn't warm, but suddenly the air felt electric against my skin, like the betrayal had cracked open something more than just my patience. I pulled out my recorder, small, voice-activated. I'd brought it in case we needed to document any anomalies during the survey. I clicked it on, brought it close to my mouth, and spoke evenly. "This is Aubrey Vale. If this recording is found and I'm not with it, know that I didn't walk away from this cave. I didn't get lost. This was not an accident. I was left behind." My hand shook, but my voice didn't. "She blocked my exit, she erased my name, and she plans to walk into a room and take credit for work she didn't do. If this is the only thing left, let it be heard." I paused, then clicked it off. Next to a natural crack in the wall, I slipped the recorder under a small outcrop, shielding it from potential water. Then I piled a few pebbles loosely over it, not enough to hide it forever, but enough to keep it safe until someone found it. Then I sat, closed my eyes, and for the first time since entering the cave, I didn't feel panic. I felt focus. I remembered a dinner years ago, one of those family things where the wine flows too fast and the tension hides behind roast chicken. Sable had just finished talking about her new position. Mom smiled with that tight, obligatory pride. Dad poured himself another glass and looked between us like he was deciding which daughter had earned a compliment that night. Then he said, "Sable leads. You follow. It's what works." No one corrected him, not Mom, not Sable, not even me. I just nodded, like I always did, like I believed that second place was safer. But not now, not anymore. I stood up, rolled my shoulders back, and looked at the path ahead, one hand on the folder, the other gripping the wall. And then I said it, not whispered, not thought. I said it aloud. When I walk out of here, I will not walk quietly. I didn't know yet what the exit looked like, or if there even was one, but I knew I was going to find it. And when I did, she'd hear me. I had just stood, one foot ready to take the next step toward whatever was left of me, when I heard it, a soft whistle. Two short, one long. It wasn't wind. It wasn't imagination. It was a signal. Ours. I froze. My heart forgot how to beat for a second. Then the light came, dim, shifting, but unmistakable. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead, his silhouette partially backlit by a narrow beam. I squinted through the dim haze, and when the figure stepped closer, the disbelief in my chest cracked into something real. Rowan. Dusty, soaked in sweat, and quieter than ever. But his eyes were sharp, focused, like he hadn't stopped searching since the moment I disappeared. He reached me without a word. His first move wasn't dramatic or tearful. He simply handed me a metal flask. "Water," he said softly. "Small sips." I took it, my hands shaking. I didn't speak. Not yet. Once I'd swallowed a few careful mouthfuls, he passed me a protein bar. It was slightly smashed, like it had been in his pocket for days. I opened it anyway. Only then did I ask, "How did you find me?" He didn't hesitate. "AirTag, headlamp strap. You don't remember putting it there?" I blinked. "I clipped it months ago, just as a habit. Forgot all about it." "I didn't." He adjusted the beam on his headlamp, scanning the surrounding rock. "When I saw Sable's press schedule go live and she didn't mention your name once, I knew something was wrong." "She blocked me in," I said, voice rough. "And she's planning to announce the discovery as her own." Rowan's jaw twitched, just slightly. "She's done worse." That wasn't a surprise. I knew he and Sable had history, nothing romantic, just professional betrayal. She'd once locked him out of a lab accreditation process, citing conflicting interests because he questioned her data interpretation. He never pushed back. He just left, quietly. But now, he'd come back. For me. He dug into his side bag and pulled out a sealed folder. "You need to see this." Inside was a printed contract, letterhead from the Board of Geological Affairs. I skimmed the opening paragraph and then stopped. My name wasn't on it. Not in the credits, not in the author list, not even in the acknowledgement section. It was an exclusive claim. Sable's name, Sable's language, and worse, an appendix that outlined ownership rights if I were unreachable for more than 48 hours. She had this prepared, Rowan said. Filed it the same day she left with you. The edges of my vision narrowed, not from anger, though I had plenty of that, but from the sheer depth of calculation. This wasn't spur of the moment. It had been planned, timed, filed. I leaned against the wall, steadying myself. I left a voice memo in the tunnel behind us, I said quietly. If she tries to claim it was an accident, that'll say otherwise. Rowan nodded once, then crouched beside the rock shelf. There's a crawl tunnel about 30 feet back. I marked it when I came in. It's tight and wet, but it opens near the lower bend, maybe 5 feet wide. You'll have to slide sideways for a bit. I didn't flinch. How long? 30 seconds of squeeze, then a cold dip through a runoff stream. I straightened. Let's do it. He smiled faintly. Didn't think you'd hesitate. Not this time. We walked back together, silent but connected in the rhythm of survival. He shone the beam on the wall, marked with chalk arrows, his version of a breadcrumb trail. At the crawlspace entrance, he turned. You'll need to go first. If it jams, I can pull you. I nodded and lowered myself to the ground. The rock pressed against my ribs as I shimmied through, sideways, arms tight to my body. The moment I felt the cold water soak my boots, I exhaled hard. But I didn't stop. Rowan followed close behind. When I finally pulled myself out onto flat stone again, dripping and trembling, he handed me a dry shirt from his bag. I changed in silence, then looked at him. She ends this now. He handed me the folder. Then let's give her the ending she deserves. We didn't walk into the building. We slipped in through the side service entrance, Rowan guiding me with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this more than once for people who weren't supposed to be missing. We'd called ahead, an anonymous tip to a board member I trusted. Just enough to get us inside, not enough to stop the show before it started. The auditorium was filled. Folded programs rested on each chair like invitations to a celebration. Her celebration. The Echo Layer Discovery was printed in glossy serif font. Beneath it, one name, just hers. I stood in the wings, watching from behind the curtains. The lights washed the stage in a soft amber glow, making Sable look even more polished than usual. She wore navy, classic, serious, and her posture was perfect, every move intentional. The projector flashed images across the screen behind her. Close-ups of mineral veins, formations I'd traced by hand, angles I'd marked on my preliminary scan logs, my work, my lens, my cave. But she smiled through it all, speaking as if the cave had whispered its secrets to her and her alone. I arrived at Echo Layer not knowing what we might find, but I had hope. Instinct. A connection to the geology I couldn't ignore. Her voice lifted, lyrical, persuasive. I heard murmurs of admiration around the room. She moved into her closing lines. Discoveries like this don't come often. They take courage, sacrifice, vision, and above all, trust. That was my cue. From the back of the room, I said clearly, without raising my voice, "Funny? And I don't remember you being alone." Heads turned. The room shifted, energy tilting like a tide breaking. Sable paused mid-sentence. "Excuse me?" I stepped into the light. My clothes were still stained from the cave, boots caked with mud, hair tied back but wild. My face looked like I'd walked through something I wasn't meant to survive, and I had. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Sable Marion Vale," I said, loud enough to echo. "You left me in that cave. You sealed the exit and called it an expedition. You told our mother I was safe. You forwarded my research to the board. You erased my name from a discovery I spent years building." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, then another, the voice recorder, the photos, the email printouts. Rowan stepped beside me, calm, silent. He didn't need to speak. Just being there made it clear this wasn't delusion. I lifted the Bluetooth speaker Sable had used to play the audio from her challenge video. I pressed play. "Let's see how long she lasts." Her voice, chipper, detached, like it was a joke. The audience was silent. I turned to the screen. She thought it'd be fun if I got stuck in there. It wasn't. A man in a gray suit leaned to another and whispered, not softly enough, "Is this real?" One of the board directors stood. Another pulled out his phone. Sable didn't move. Her mouth twitched, but her body stayed still, as if by standing still enough she could pretend this wasn't happening. I kept going. I didn't need a podium. I had truth and proof. This contract, I held up the legal document, would have transferred all future rights to her if I'd been declared missing for more than 48 hours. She filed it before we even entered the cave. Sable finally spoke. "You're upset. I understand that. But this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," I snapped. "You built this stage for applause." I turned it into a courtroom. The crowd shifted again, some in disbelief, some nodding slowly, others just trying to keep up with the spiral. Security moved forward, uncertain. A woman with a staff badge whispered into her radio. Sable stepped back. Her smile cracked, the practiced veneer giving way to something rawer. "I was going to mention you," she said softly, eyes scanning for someone to save her. "You were in the second version of the slides." I laughed. "So was I in the second version of your life? The part where I didn't matter until I came back?" Silence returned, thick, judgmental, brutal. Rowan placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. A show of support, not possession. I nodded once, letting the folder fall to the floor at Sable's feet. She didn't pick it up. After the folder hit the stage floor and the room split wide with tension, the event staff ushered me off to a small room behind the auditorium. Not forcibly, just discreetly, as though I'd broken some unspoken rule about how women are supposed to reveal betrayal, quietly later, preferably over email. Rowan stayed behind to speak with a few board members. I didn't ask what was said. I was too tired to care, and too clear-headed to let that stop me from what had to happen next. I sat on a beige bench with fabric that smelled like decades of dust and old conference coffee. The lights buzzed above me, too bright, and the silence settled again. But this time, it didn't scare me. That's when she walked in. My mother, Lenora Vale. Always composed, always reasonable, always dressed like a woman who thought survival came from not making a scene. She closed the door behind her, didn't sit, just stood there, arms crossed, her mouth set in a way I recognized from 1,000 childhood scoldings. "I heard everything," she said finally. "I don't know what I was expecting, but—" She trailed off, then sighed. "I'm sure your sister didn't mean for things to go that far. You know how you get." I didn't respond. I looked at her, really looked, and realized something I hadn't seen before. She wasn't confused. She wasn't uncertain. She was disappointed. But not in Sable. In me. Because I hadn't kept it quiet. Because I'd brought the mess to the surface. Because I'd made it public. I stood slowly. She planned it. She filed paperwork to take everything. She knew I could have died in there. "She's your sister," Mom said softly. "She made a mistake." "No, she made a move." Silence stretched between us. A silence that had started when I was 9, and Sable blamed me for breaking the telescope, and I took the punishment because she had that big science fair coming up. "Do you even believe me?" I asked. Mom didn't answer, and in that answer, I found the kind of clarity I had never dared demand before. I left the room, didn't wait for her to say anything more. Backstage, Rowan stood holding a clipboard and a bottle of water. "They've asked if you'd like to close the event," he said. Final remarks. "I'll write it myself." He nodded once, handed me a pen. 20 minutes later, I stepped onto the stage. The room had emptied slightly. Some of the donors had slipped out, some attendees unsure of how to exist in truth's aftermath. But those who stayed, they were listening. I walked to the microphone, adjusted it once. No slides, no introduction. "I'm not going to name names," I began. "You already heard them. I'm not going to retell what just unfolded. You witnessed it, and I'm not going to thank the people who didn't protect me, because protection, in families, should never be optional." A few murmurs. A few heads lowered. I will say this, silence can be a form of survival. I know that now. But it's not a way to live. And truth? That's how we reclaim air. That's how we make space for people like me, who do the work, who live in the shadows, who don't get credit unless we demand it. I paused, not for effect, just to breathe. To every person who's ever been edited out of their own story, this moment is yours too. I stepped back. No applause, not at first. Then one clap, then two, then more. Not a standing ovation, just something honest, human, enough. After the lights dimmed, people filtered out. A few approached me, quietly. One woman from the institute whispered, "Thank you for saying it out loud." I smiled gently. Someone had to. Near the exit, Rowan stood with his hands in his pockets. "You okay?" he asked. I didn't nod, didn't shrug, just said, "I think I finally exhaled." We stepped outside into the crisp Colorado evening. The air smelled like pine and possibility, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to shrink to fit inside the world I loved. A month passes differently after public truth. It doesn't explode. It settles, softly, heavily, like sediment building layer by layer after the flood has passed. Back at the Institute, my badge now carries the correct title. My name sits neatly beneath the expedition banner, stitched in fabric on the hallway posters. And though no one says it outright, the energy in the building has changed. Some people nod, a few look away, but most offer a quiet kind of respect, not admiration, not sympathy, just recognition. I spend my mornings reviewing mineral data. The samples I pulled from Echo Layer still carry high mineral potential, but no one's rushing to drill now. The funding froze 2 weeks after the press conference. Donors quietly backed out. The Institute didn't explain. They never do. And Sable? She's disappeared from every meeting, email thread, and committee calendar. Her name was quietly removed from the lead investigator position 2 days after I presented the full documentation to the ethics board. There was no announcement, no official retraction, just a vanishing act. I didn't chase her down. I didn't demand a public apology. I didn't need one. But one afternoon, while sorting messages in my inbox, I saw her name, accidentally forwarded from a board member, an internal thread. She'd replied to an inquiry asking for clarification on her withdrawal from the expedition record. She always wanted silence, Sable had written. Well, now she's the only voice. I sat with that line for a long time. It was meant to be bitter, but it sounded more like confession. She wasn't wrong. I had wanted silence. For years, I clung to it like a shield. I thought staying small meant staying safe. I thought if I let her take the spotlight, maybe she'd leave me the substance. But silence lets others draw your outline, and they never draw you fully. A week later, I took a day off from the lab, drove the long, winding road back toward Flatiron Hills. The weather had shifted, autumn pulling back, leaving that dry chill that warned of early snow. I parked where we had weeks earlier. The same trailhead, same faded sign. Only this time, I didn't carry a pack of samples, just a canteen, a notebook, and a small carved stone in my coat pocket. The hike felt different, lighter. Not because the path was easier, but because I wasn't dragging her weight behind me anymore. I stopped near the cave's mouth. The opening was the same, narrow, dark, waiting. But I didn't go inside. Instead, I knelt by the edge and pulled the stone from my pocket. It was palm-sized, gray, marked with a simple carving. A.V. Still standing. I placed it just inside the entrance, not buried. Not hidden, just there. A marker, not of tragedy, but of endurance. On the walk back, I thought of the people who'd messaged me. Former students, quiet scientists, women who said, "I know exactly what that feels like." Some shared stories. Some just said thank you. Some said nothing, but I could hear their breath between the lines. We are everywhere. The almost named, the almost thanked, the almost credited. Some scars fade, some remain, and some, like mine, become part of the map. I didn't want justice. Not really. I wanted to be seen, not as the sister, not as the footnote, not as the one who helped, but as the cartographer, the one who found the chamber before anyone else even knew to look. I stood at the top of the trail and watched the wind move the trees, light shifting through pine needles like it had always done. Then I walked back to the car, slowly, unhurried, not afraid. And I still do. Not every betrayal leaves bruises you can see. Some carve themselves deep into the places we trust most: family, love, and legacy. Aubrey's story reminds us that being silent doesn't mean being weak, and being kind doesn't mean being blind. Sometimes the quietest ones carry the loudest truth. Have you ever been the one left out, only to come back stronger? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories that hit deep and stay with you.